Welcome, everybody, to another professionally evil podcast, I guess. I don't know. This isn't really a professionally evil podcast. I guess it's the Pew webcast. So I'm coming off of a couple weeks of vacation. We were just talking about that before we started on here, and the fact that in parts of Europe, outside the butcher shops, there are meat vending machines, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and it kind of relates to the brick and mortar retailers a little bit. So maybe someday we can do a pen test on a meat vending machine. I think that's a great idea.
I am so in for this.
So exactly, yeah. So anyway. So we're going to be talking today about a guide for independent brick and mortar retailers, and we have today a couple of our senior consultants, Aaron Moss and Bill McCauley. And I am basically just going to step away and let you guys go ahead and introduce yourself and go from here. So take it away.
All right. Here, I'll go ahead and advance this forward here. So hello, everyone. My name is Bill McCauley. I've been with Secure Ideas. Let's see, finishing up 6 years soon. Here in June, going into my 7th. So that will be fun. Since 2018, I live out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm in the DFW area, but everything is an hour, 2 hours away. And background really has to do with, I've done everything from electronics to avionics to radios, radars, DoD healthcare, education system, energy industry, lots of different things, which I found in this type of work gives a lot of touch points, right? It gets a lot of connecting things where I may not have seen the exact technology, but I'm pretty sure I've been exposed to it at some point in time over the years. So it's actually been a really good thing. I had cows. I think I still got this marked out. They're scratched out on my little bio there, because had them, technically still have them, but they're in the freezer. Speaking of the meat vending machine.
I was going to say, we're just talking about a meat vending machine. That's a deep freeze at this point, right?
It is, 2 of them, because you'd be surprised how much space those things take up.
Oh, yeah.
But we're in the middle of Scarborough Renaissance Festival down here, Waxahachie, about 2 hours south of us. And weekends we're trying to head out there and visit. Aside from that, Aaron, it's all you.
All right. I don't know who's in control of the slides here. It ain't me.
I'll do it.
Yeah. Aaron Moss, senior security consultant here at Secure Ideas. I've been consulting since around about 2017, I guess it was. Yeah, I mean, according to the slide there. So I'm going to go with that because I've been doing this a while and I honestly don't remember. I am based in Tulsa with Nathan Sweeney, who is
that guy.
One of the other guys that actually got me on here at Secure Ideas. But we've known each other for years because of B-Sides, Oklahoma. So if anybody's familiar with B-Sides, Oklahoma, we basically started that we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and it was amazing. Yeah. Bill was there, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I am jack of all trades, master of just a couple, mostly help desk and consulting stuff like that. I'm also a deconstructed Christian, which means that basically I'm essentially just questioning everything that I was taught whenever I was growing up about the Christian faith and about Jesus, and coming out the other side, I think, closer to him than I ever have been before. Now, the other two things that I am don't necessarily, most people think, go along with that Christian thing, but I'm a huge horror movie geek, if you can't tell from all the stuff back here. And I'm also a big metalhead. So, I like all kinds of metal, especially Slayer and Cannibal Corpse, again, that don't go necessarily along with the Christian faith, but hey, it is what it is.
Awesome. In that case, thank you.
Yeah.
So when we put this together, one of the things that we wanted to touch on really revolved around small to medium businesses. We're going to focus on retailers as part of this, but in reality, the things that we're going to cover are going to they're going to relate to most any small to medium business that's out there. And so one of the first questions that we came up with is, what keeps you up at night? Like, what are the reasons that you would attend a webcast like this? Is it because there was a security event that has recently happened? Is it because there is a new business or new compliance requirement? What are the things that keep you up at night? And what are the things that would be such as, or what would the things be as an existential, basically, what would an existential risk be to your organization? Sorry, my words are getting mixed up today. So the audience here is really related to those smaller businesses, retail being one of them. And it could be for someone who is either from the management side of things, someone who's dealing with the business side of an organization, saying, what's most important? What are my key functions? What are the core processes that as an organization, I have to keep these running in order for us to stay in business? Versus maybe you have an IT background, which is you're doing infrastructure, you're doing security, you're doing some other pieces. Sometimes it's very easy for those different areas and other areas within your organization to be focused on different or competing interests. And so one of the things we want to focus on is, let's bring those together and focus on some of the core problems that you're going to have to work with as a small business or as a retailer. And so usually, in most cases, it's not the flashy things that are going to keep a business running smoothly. A lot of times it's those smaller things that are not always noticeable that are going to be very, very important as we go forward.
Flashy things, do you mean the blinky lights?
Flashy, blinky lights, yes. Like all the neon signs.
Oh, so, I was talking about, that commercial from way back in the day where it was like, that little blinking light, that's our security.
That's our security.
Right? Yeah.
I was actually thinking the difference between the marketing versus, right, what the core flashy things are versus what's the non-visible things that are keeping the business afloat at the moment.
Right. Like cybersecurity risks, right? The focus is on the overarching security risks, right? As a whole. Mm-hmm. Like, we're talking about identity theft. You can read the slide here. Identity theft, embarrassment of website defacement, which, let's be honest, when's the last time you really saw a website defacement? That seems like it was so the 90s, right? It still does happen, right? You can still find it on occasion. But most of the things we're talking about now are like phishing attacks, ransomware, and data loss. These are the things that really affect small businesses, even large businesses, but really affect small businesses, right? Because the maturity of your organization, your organizational security can make a huge difference. And it also can affect the availability and usability of your data. Let's take an example real quick, right? The financial security controls surrounding credit cards, data is typically worth a lot less, for the credit card numbers and CVVs and stuff like that, than something would be for stolen medical records, right? Typically speaking, this is because credit card compromises are usually caught fairly quickly, right? Healthcare data, often it's not. It can take a while for healthcare data to actually be caught because, it just depends on how it gets leaked out and other stuff, and also how people find it. It leads to a lot of different things like stolen identities, prescription medications, or it can even lead to getting other credit cards, right? Or other financial risks. Now, there may be some of your organizations out there that are experiencing both credit cards and credit cards and medical, in which case you probably ought to keep an eye on both of those, right? So the thing is what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically decrease the effectiveness of attacks so that these particular types of attacks, phishing attacks, ransomware, stuff like that, doesn't affect your overall business structure, right? According to some statistics from 2022, in the third quarter of 2022 alone, the Federal Trade Commission received a staggering 260,000 identity theft reports, right? And that's, of course, due to credit card theft and, again, medical records and stuff like that. So the bottom line is, anytime something like this happens to a small business, it can cause serious, serious damage and sometimes even downright catastrophic disasters that cause a business to go down.
To add on to that real quick, I had done some data protection classes. And one of the research that I did on that indicated that in general, to go back to your point about the medical data, that medical data was typically more valuable to them because of the fewer controls. I mean, if my credit card is taken, if it's misused, within minutes, that transaction is stopped. There's normally a notification that gets sent out. I say yes or no on my phone.
Right. Or you get a phone call.
I get a phone call, and my credit card, like the charge is refunded, the credit card's blocked and turned off, and typically within 24 hours, you've got a new card on the way.
Now, I wish they did this with debits.
Yeah, those controls are quick and they're very effective. Conversely, the medical data, not quite so much. And the flexibility, the usability of that data, you've got usernames, you've got social, you've got prescriptions, you've got all different kinds of things that it can be used for, which overall tends to make it more valuable.
Right. Now, of course, if that doesn't affect your small business, then you're probably more worried about credit cards and other information like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to hop to the next slide here real quick because I have some statistics. This was actually pulled from the DBIR 2023 report. Now, 2024 just came out.
Like just in the last, 2 weeks?
Just last week. Yep.
Last week, yeah.
And so these particular stats were a little bit different. So we're going to start with small to medium businesses versus larger ones. Now, if you're a small or medium business, which retailers typically are, there are some larger ones, but let's assume that you've got a small company, handful of people. In most cases, you're going to have an IT person who is your security. They're going to be IT plus this. They're going to wear all kinds of hats and probably never sleep. Now, if you're a little bit larger than that, you may be a medium business where, okay, you've done a few things, you've been around for a little bit, you've been working on your cybersecurity, and now you're looking at a place to, well, how do I ratchet this up? How do I tweak this and tune this so it's more effective and more efficient for our organization? Now, one of the points that this particular slide is meant to emphasize is that you would think that there would be a higher discrepancy, right? There'd be a larger gap between those large and those small businesses. But if you look through those stats and just glance through them, they're very close, some of them within maybe 5%. And so you figure, why in the world would small to medium businesses and larger businesses have a similar attack profile? The main reason to that, when I was doing the research on this, is that we're all using AD. We're all using O365, right? We're all using similar technologies. And so if the same technologies are being used between larger businesses, medium, small, retail, otherwise, then that in itself is going to narrow the gap between these two groups. And so an attacker, when he looks at something, he's simply going to look for what is the path of least resistance. And so you'll notice when you get down to the data compromise, because all of those others, you figure most threat actors are external, most of the motivations are going to be financial in nature. Data compromised, you're looking at 50% for a small business, which they may not have the same controls around access or account management. For the large business size, 37, percentage-wise, that's a nearly a 20% gap. But for the sake of easy math, if a medium business had 100 people in it, half of that, you figure 54 accounts. 37% of a larger business that has 1,000 or more employees, that's 370 accounts. So even though the percentages is different, the actual total numbers could be quite large. And so you still look at it, and credentials and internal data are the two biggest things that are being sought after on both of those. And a lot of that is because that gap is narrowed and we're using all of the same technologies across the board. So in addition to that, related to retail specific, is last week I was going through and reading up on some of the retail specific areas in that DBIR. Now, retail is one of those areas where usually you're going to have people attacking your e-commerce sites. This is where they're going to try and find, try and locate, and try and use different types of payment card information. And based on that previous slide, as far as percentages, this is where you're going to see people focusing on payment card information to see what they could get from it. Interestingly, from 23 to 2024, the shift has changed. So there was last year, I believe it was 37% was focused on payment card data, but down this year to 25%. So there's a shift. And rather than searching for that credit card information, like we discussed earlier, it's more difficult for them to use that information. So what do? They go to credentials. Usually, again, path of least resistance. Two main options, two main conditions or possibility as to why this would be the case. You see a decrease in payment card information being sought after, and you see an increase in credentials being gathered. So is it maybe retailers in particular have gotten better about protecting their credit card data, which makes it harder for it to get stolen in the first place, or it's possible that retailers in general are getting better with their basic cybersecurity, as in they know what to look for, not falling for the same phishing campaigns. And so they've gotten better, therefore the attackers have to adapt. And if you look at this for the attack and defense side, there's normally a give and take. As you go along, there's always a give and take where one's ahead and then the other's ahead. The defense moves ahead, then the offense. Part of that, when I was looking through the DBIR for 2024, is that there's been an increase in pretexting. So pretexting is essentially where you're claiming to be something you're not. But conversely, there's been, like, the alternate side of that is phishing attempts have dropped. Hopefully this is due to people getting better with phishing awareness and security training among the people, among your personnel and employees. But it's interesting to see those types of dynamics take place. So if you haven't actually gone out and looked at those, there's a lot of good information in that document. I know me and Aaron were talking about it the other day, that even though there's a lot of information there, it's actually very, very readable.
And yeah, I mean, part of the thing that makes it readable, of course, is just like it sets a tone from the very beginning of like a humorous, even though it's very educational and it's not dry by any stretch. So if you like to read some stuff that's somewhat funny, like definitely check out the DBIR. They've been doing that for years, and it's one of the things that makes it stand out as far as any kind of white papers and stuff like that are concerned. So to move on, right? Like basically the problem is this: foundational principles are going to be the same regardless of the size of your organization, right? Even these large organizations that are in the news all the time with some kind of a breach or some kind of incident or whatever else, right? Even if you're not in the news, doesn't mean that you're not affected, especially as a small business. Because here's the thing: many small businesses that are affected by attacks like what we're experiencing or what we're seeing, they never get mentioned in the news or have any kind of media coverage because they simply just shut down, right? They're not big enough to cause any kind of media coverage or anything. They just go away, and it's awful. You're talking people's lifeblood here, right? And when things like this happen, it's detrimental to everybody involved, right? So the problem is, right, what can we do as a medium or small organization with a limited budget? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. The resources are less available, but if we focus on the basics, then we can, you as an organization, and I say we because I've been in a similar situation. Like I said, I was an IT director. I was an IT manager for tribes and for small organizations and stuff like that for many years before I started security consulting. And so I have quite a bit of experience with trying to secure these different platforms and stuff like that with a very limited budget. So again, it goes back to the basics: inventory and control of enterprise assets, your hardware, inventory and control of your software assets, data protection, right? So we're talking about data protection as far as like, hey, data backups, and are you protecting your critical data from like people who shouldn't have access to it, etc. Secure configurations of your hardware and software, proper account management. You would think that would be relatively simple, but whenever you still have several different people in different places, it's much harder to actually gain control over your accounts and who should have access to what, which goes to access control management, which we'll talk about briefly too.
Yep. So the question comes down to, it really comes down to, what can we do? Where do we start? I don't have funds. I don't have a lot of material. I don't have a lot of manpower. I'm probably, if you're the only person at that organization, you're the one wearing all the hats, or one or two of you are splitting some of those responsibilities. So the question comes down to, where do we start? What are our options? What are the resources that we can use? One thing that I would want to point out is for tackling this type of problem, this is not something that one individual is going to be able to do. If you've been involved in any of the CISSP classes, then you'll notice that requires buy-in, that requires coordination with multiple departments for multiple reasons.
Right.
And so don't expect to do this solo. It's going to be a joint effort. And so go ahead. You were going to say something, Aaron.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, from that perspective, right? Like, the thing is one of the things that I had to learn in the years of especially doing, like, being an IT director and management and stuff like that, is it's not just about me and how I feel the organization should be organized, or as far as like the data and all that stuff is concerned, right? Business efforts have to be focused on the business or the organization and what their mission is, right? And so the question goes to, what do you value, right? And whenever you're asking yourself, what do you value, you have to basically figure out, how am I going to prioritize all of these different aspects of the business? How am I going to prioritize the data that I have? How do I prioritize my assets? How do I prioritize my personnel, my people? You know, all that stuff like that. It all rolls together. And so security is not just security for security's sake, right? It's to protect the business and to protect the people that are a part of the business. So again, first things first, asset and inventory management should be a top priority. And assets, of course, include your computers, your workstations, tablets, servers, any kind of hardware system, right? But it also includes, again, your software. It includes your data. It especially includes your personnel. So what must be protected to ensure that your business continues to operate? You got to identify it, right? Again, asset and inventory management. Identify what you have first, right? How do you quantify all that stuff? Well, put it all on a spreadsheet if you have to. I mean, that's a good starting point. I don't know if I'd stay there necessarily, but at least having it written down somewhere and having that information is going to be a key point to getting the process started, right? Your client information, your customer information, all the data, all the financials that goes with all of it needs to be maybe not necessarily like detailed written down, but at least having an idea of what's there. And then you perform what we call in the SISP a business impact analysis, right? Bill, you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. Tell you what, let me hop over to the next part of this.
I like it.
Because, so when you're going through to look at these things, the core thing that you're looking at are, what are the critical functions that your business does that you can't live without? There's a lot of things that your organization will do that you can do without for a period of time. In most cases, there's a handful of things that that need to be prioritized. And part of that impact analysis is prioritizing the things that your business relies on to stay afloat. One of the problems that we run into, though, is when we start looking at different types of cyber, when we do pen tests, in a lot of cases, and this has been validated through different studies, in most cases, cyber attacks are often attributed to a lack of good hygiene. In a lot of cases, a configuration someplace. It's typically fairly simple, but it's really important to keep an eye on this, because most attacks are going to take advantage of conditions that could have been avoided. So this is where maybe you haven't patched those servers, or maybe there is a secure configuration with, we'll get to later, for CIS benchmarks. You're running an application there. When you install an application, it is very, very rare that the default installation is going to be the secure installation. In most cases, when you install an application or get a tool up and running, the vendor wants it running. The secure configuration is a secondary concern for them in most cases, not always, but in most cases.
Yeah.
And so when you install something, or when you put in a tool, an application, a platform, or whatever, assume that the default configuration is insecure, and it will be your responsibility to tune that so that it's actually behaving in a secure manner. CIS benchmarks are a great way to do that. So configuration management, patching, admin rights. There are times we talk about this, Eric. I don't know if you've ever attended any of Eric's Active Directory for red teaming, or red team. Is it Active Directory for red team, or red teaming for Active Directory?
It's red teaming for Active Directory.
For Active Directory.
Or AD.
That is it. One of the things that he constantly gets on about is compartmentalization. Is that you've got highly privileged accounts that are crossing those boundaries to get to lower privileged environments. And so when you deal with your administrative accounts, when you deal with your user management, those are the things you want to keep in mind, because if they had sectioned those off so that those privileged accounts were restricted to just the areas that they needed to perform actions on, you're going to limit significantly who can get to those accounts, and the type of damage or impact that can be done with them. So user management, compartmentalization, tiering, configuration management, those types of things. So when we're looking at those, basic security hygiene, which this would be considered basic security hygiene, are going to play a huge factor in limiting what someone could do if they get on your network or into your application.
Right. Now, we keep talking about the CIS security controls, right? And typically speaking... Sorry,
I jumped ahead
too far.
A
lot of people... What?
I jumped ahead too far. I bounced it back for you.
No, you're fine. I think I'm the one to transition the slide, so here we are. But we keep talking about the CIS controls. Now, there may be some of you out there who are saying, I've never heard of the CIS controls. If you've ever heard of the SANS Top 20 critical security controls, this was the evolution of that, right? Basically, it eventually became the CIS, which is the Center for Information Security, right? Critical security controls. And eventually it became, it's not did eventually. It eventually became 18 controls instead of the top 20 controls, because they combined a few different controls from 7.1 to version 8, which was released in, May 2021. So it's a few years old now. But we strongly recommend that any organization out there that has any kind of information security capacity whatsoever reviews these controls on a regular basis, right? Now, when we're talking about the ones for what we're trying to talk about today and the basics, that typically refers to the first 6 controls, which we'll go over here in just a minute. One of the things that CIS went from in version 7 to 7.1, I believe it was, is they started in doing implementation groups, right? And basically that was a way for them to group these different controls together based on the risk profile and resources available and everything, so that if you implement this specific implementation group, you can actually have a very good baseline of security overall, right? The grouping of the controls and the subcontrols follow basically a know, protect, prepare, and lather, rinse, repeat, always repeat organization. Right? You know your assets, you protect with your technical controls, and then organizational, you prepare with your policies, right?
Here, there you go. Got it.
I was going to say, I think, yeah. So this one should be me as well. Yep. Now, here's the thing about the CIS controls. The CIS controls as a whole are a one-size-fits-all, right? Sort of. Not really. It's really a great starting place to just get your head wrapped around what controls you need to be implemented. The list is not the be all end all. As a matter of fact, really what it is each control just informs how you should tailor it to your environment. So it's an option for you basically to look at and say, okay, I'm going to read about asset and inventory management. Well, these are basically things that realistically speaking, every organization should be doing. I'm going to harp on this until the day that I quit security consulting because it is just so important. How many times have we run across an organization, Bill or Jason, where we've basically said, hey, you've got this particular server out there. Say it's like a Windows 2008 or, even a Windows 2003, or I even just in the last couple of weeks, I actually saw a Windows XP machine. I swear to you, a Windows XP machine active on the network.
Do those really exist anymore?
Huh?
Do those really exist anymore?
Yeah, it did. It did. And guess what it was vulnerable to? Anybody who's not familiar with MS 17010, that was the same exploit and vulnerability that WannaCry was based off of a few years ago. And it was still vulnerable to that. Popped it. Got admin creds and went from there. The point is, I asked the team that we were working with, hey, did you guys know you had this out here? What are you talking about? Here, it's at this IP address. Are you serious? I was like, yeah, we've got a shell on it right now. And then basically their faces just kind of went pale, right? Because they had no idea. Asset and inventory management are so important. Right?
You can't protect it if you don't know what's there.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So whenever it comes to the design principles and everything, offense informs defense, right? Your sys controls are selected, dropped, and prioritized based on the data that we have or that they have, and on specific knowledge of the attacker behavior and how to stop it. We're here to tell you how the attacker behavior works, just like I just did, right? If you don't know you have something, we go to attack it, all of a sudden your network is compromised and you had no idea because you didn't even know it was there. Focus. You helping defenders identify the most critical things, again, asset and inventory management, that they need to do to stop the most important attacks. If you've got something like, again, 17010 sitting out on your network, or there's been some lately, one of the attacks has actually been the Certify attacks, which is Active Directory Certificate Services attacks. That's almost instantaneous domain admin in a matter of just minutes, in a couple hours sometimes. Sometimes less than that, right? And so the focus is to help you avoid being tempted to solve every security problem. Instead, you're prioritizing based on what your highest risk is, right? You're not really necessarily looking for the good things to do or things you could do. You're trying to figure out, how am I going to best protect, and then work down the list, right? The feasibility, all the individual recommendations and safeguards must be specific and practical to implement. That's a huge important part of the controls themselves. Again, it goes back to, you have to tailor it to your environment. All of your security controls, all these CIS controls, especially for implementation group 1, must be measurable. We must be able to actually be able to see what's being done and be able to tell that there's quantifiable and qualifiable controls that are in place to reduce these risks. We should be able to see, okay, yeah, I've got antivirus implemented, right? I've got shares turned off. I've got these account controls in place that are keeping people from being able to access or access controls in place, rather to keep people from being able to access certain data. I've got separate admin accounts for my admins from their daily use accounts, right? The alignment, we're trying to create and demonstrate a peaceful coexistence with all the different rules and regulations and process management and frameworks and every kind of structure that's out there, so that whenever we have the security in place, we're not basically, it's still usable, because if your personnel can't use your network, can't use the data, can't use the systems that they need to do their job, then what's the point? Yeah, you may be secure, but you've just created a problem with availability where nobody can do anything, right? So you're trying to cooperate with all of these different pieces to make sure that everything functions together in a nice cohesive unit. Just to to touch on IG1, right? Implementation Group 1, which is what we're really focused on today. According to the Center for Information Security, which is the CIS, where the controls are based at now, implementing the IG1 controls alone can help to mitigate 77% of malware attacks, 78% of ransomware attacks, 86% of web app attacks, 86% of insider privileges and misuse attacks, right? We're talking about like somebody taking over credentials and then escalating privileges and stuff like that, or just you may have an insider that is just decided that, you know, they wanted to be malicious for some reason and attack the internal network for whatever reason. And it also can prevent or at least help to mitigate 83% of targeted attacks, right? Targeted intrusions. And of course, you know, if you implement all the rest of the security controls in the CIS 18, then that drastically goes up into somewhere in the 90s.
Yeah. So the way that we were going through a lot of this is when you're dealing with the implementation groups, they've got it broken down into 3 levels. Now, we've been talking a lot about the cyber hygiene. The cyber hygiene really is, this is your prioritization for level 1. And again, we're looking at small to medium businesses. We're looking at retailers. We're looking at smaller organizations that have fewer resources, fewer manpower, limitations, right? Larger institutions are going to have a dedicated IT team. They're going to have dedicated response, possibly forensics. They're going to have large amounts of manpower, people, resources to pull from, including enterprise level tools to work with. Most smaller accounts or most smaller organizations don't have those resources. And so the reason they were broken up into the basic security hygiene, everything in this IG1 category is meant to be your essential protections. These are the foundations. These are the building blocks. These are things that every organization, regardless of size or industry, should have. This is where you're going to prioritize. You'll get your IG1 installed. This is the group that is the least costly, least difficult to implement, and should be applied everywhere. Really, this is the minimum standard for information security. Once you get into the IG2 and IG3 levels, those are places where, you know, you may have started with your info security plan, but that may vary, and you may have to adjust trajectory as you move forward. IG2 and IG3 are meant to be those next levels where you want to ratchet up the security in those areas.
Right. That kind of goes back to the, you know, these would be good to implement, or these are things I'd like to do, but they're not necessarily the essentials.
And IG2 and 3 will sometimes require more resources, which is why IG1 is specifically geared towards getting all of those foundational items. But you ever heard the term hard target? Make yourself a difficult target, right?
I like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I watched that a while back, as a matter of fact. Great movie.
Oh, that brings me back.
Yes, it does. Lance Henriksen. Yeah.
I see Jason smiling too.
Yeah. Hey, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies are great, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's a 3-phase implementation, right?
Yep. 3-phase. So it's broken around know, protect, prepare. We've touched on those briefly earlier. One thing to keep in mind in the preparation stage of this is that preparing your organization is also related to your awareness training, personnel security awareness type training amongst your employees internally. And so this is where IG1 really shines is there's a very clear activity that you're pointing to, right? There's something you can implement this and you should be able to see some measurable difference, as Aaron had mentioned earlier, between before and after.
And the cool thing about this is not to override anything. Sorry, Bill. The great thing about measurability is that you can actually take this to your executive management, your C-levels and stuff like that, and say, hey, listen, we've actually blocked this number of attacks with, you know, like say, for instance, you know, you could show them some antivirus stuff, right? Just as a starting point, some antivirus statistics to say, hey, we've blocked this many attacks from viruses or from malware or whatever else, right? But you can also show them logs and stuff like that. And of course, you know, break it down to a manageable level that a C-level who doesn't have time to look at direct statistics or anything else can understand, but at least you have something that you can take back and say, hey, we're making progress.
Yeah.
And this is why we need to continue building on top of what we've already got.
Yeah. Statistics are not going to be the end all be all, but they are very useful in measuring some.
A great building block.
Yep. All right, let's see here. So jumping into phase one. Phase one really comes down to know your environment.
What is that? We call it asset and inventory management?
I think you've mentioned that once or twice.
I can't remember. I talk about it a lot.
Yep. So you have to know what's connected to your network, right? Do you know what software is being installed? Are you regulating who can install what? Who has installation rights? And is there an approved software list that they can pull from? Do you know where your primary data, where your core data is being stored, how it's being stored? Is it being backed up? Is it being stored encrypted? If that's necessary, right? Is it being stored in transit? Who's using it and for what purposes? There's a lot of legwork that comes down to knowing what your environment is, because in most places people are starting, in most cases, even organizations that have been around for a while are often starting from, okay, we need a blank slate. We need to know what's out there. Let's go through and inventory everything. And it's one of those areas, because I've had to do this in the past with other positions, is that inventory list is very quickly out of date if you don't maintain it. It's very easy to sprawl out of control.
Absolutely.
I would add that it can be extremely difficult to do depending on how your organization got to its current point. Because if you look at, for example, just consider shared drives alone.
Mm-hmm.
In small to medium organizations, if they've never been managed, then you have this plethora of data that might be extracts from databases. So you don't have a central place for your data. Really, it ends up being all over the place, and that can just be another whole activity on its own. I think organizing that.
There's a user share here. There's a public share there. Oh, this environment was spun up for this tool that's no longer in use. But while it was in use, it had to integrate with these other systems over here, and data has been extracted off of them.
Or even worse, that report, that's on Sally's laptop.
Yeah. Or, going back to public drives and stuff like that. I mean, I can give you another example. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, maybe. I don't remember. Anyway, we were looking at an internal network that had several different shared drives and stuff like that between, and a lot of them were like public. We were given access to just a basic account on the network and did a scan of all these different servers that were out there and found, I cannot tell you, I mean, hundreds, almost, I mean, possibly in the thousands of credentials, plain text, just sitting in Excel spreadsheets and in OneNote documents and stuff like that. Like, I'm talking plain text credentials to log into several different systems, hundreds of systems. Yeah. And they were just sitting there for anybody who wanted to access them, right? Like, that's part of the problem. If you're not inventorying and managing who has access to what, you're going to get compromised quickly.
So one of the things that IG1 helps with is it actually guides you towards maintaining that inventory of your hardware, your software, all of those different things, right? It walks you through and gives you information on how to identify, right? How to classify your data, how to classify your information. Point you towards auditing those controls. So inventory, asset control, I know that we've talked about this a couple times, so I won't belabor it here, but one of the things that the IG1 shines at is being able to point you towards taking care of those core items that when you have those done, that is significantly going to increase your overall security posture.
Absolutely. Highly recommended.
Out of curiosity, can you go back to that slide just for a second? Sorry,
sure.
I'm jumping in because it's.
Where did Jason come from?
I know, right? I was trying not to say anything, but it's an area of interest for me. So I'm just what I'm curious about, because it's been a while since I looked at it, but do they provide any sort of linkage to policies and standards, that type? Because a lot of this kind of feeds or can feed into the administrative controls.
You're right.
Not just checking and auditing, but also, hey, we have a policy, or we've come up with a standard that all of this type of data has to be managed in this location.
That's a great point, because they actually do point you towards acceptable use policies, right? Okay. They're like, what is the policy? What is acceptable? What are the requirements and around that? They do point towards administrative controls.
Because if all you do is scan and then audit, then you're never really fixing the root problem, which is people are putting things in the wrong places to begin with.
Yep. No, that's a fantastic call out. And they do exactly that. One of the items that they mention are making sure that you have those types of policies, whether it's your security policy, your use policy, right? What is the intended use and what is acceptable for use with these types of systems and data and other things?
Perfect.
So, and to go back to the policy and stuff like that real quick, the cool thing is there is actually within just the first control, there are several different. Well, no, actually, I take that back. It's not just the first control. For all the different controls, there are actually policy templates, right? So you can go look at these templates for your policies and stuff like that. If you don't have a policy at all, these are a great starting place, right? And then use that, tailor it to your organization. And again, this is where it comes into, you have to work with management. Right, you have to work, maybe not necessarily with your C-levels and stuff like that, because again, depending on the size of your organization, they may not care. But if you're in a small and medium business, I have a very strong feeling that your C-level is probably going to be just someone 2 doors down from you that you're probably going to be like working hand in hand with in the first place. So this is a thing where you need to go and talk to them and say, hey, listen, here's what we need to look at for doing all these different policies and stuff like that, so that for the future, we actually have this written down, because we don't have anything right now, or we have something very light, right? Go look at these templates, go download these templates, tailor them to your own organization, and then set them in place. Have them signed off on by some sort of executive or C-level, whatever else, to say, hey, if these aren't being followed, there will be consequences, right? That's an important part. We're moving on to the next slide, right?
Yep, go for it.
All right, so protecting your assets. Sorry, I didn't think, yeah. Do you have the computers, whenever you set up your computers, do you keep security in mind? That's a question for you to answer. Obviously, I can't hear you, but I think I heard at least maybe 1 or 2 of you saying, well, yeah, I think so. Maybe there's 1 or 2 of you who's like, not really. Well, then if not, why not? Start with the basics again, right? Simply inventory what's on your system, right? If you're like a lot of small businesses and organizations, there might be 1 or 2 admins, and they have access all the time. They don't have separate accounts for their regular user, daily drivers, or anything like that. As a matter of fact, their regular user, daily drivers are going to be their admin accounts. Well, I hate to tell you this, but if we jumped on that network and compromised that, we've just got your entire everything. We just, any attacker who is able to access that just completely compromised your network. The bad thing is, if you don't have a lot of other controls in place, like logging and stuff like that, you may not even know, right? So how do you manage who has access to the sensitive information, databases, spreadsheets, those, let's talk about those passwords and stuff like that I talked about earlier, right? If any of this explains your organization whatsoever, fix it immediately. Go check out these controls, go check out these policies, and then figure out how to tailor it. Again, everything has to be tailored. I cannot stress this enough. It has to be tailored to your organization. It's not a a be all, end all, and fix all, but it is definitely a great starting place. The next thing, how do you educate your users on the important role they play in your organization's cybersecurity practices? Well, it's simple. Security is everyone's responsibility, right? All the time, every time. And it's not just about phishing and ransomware attacks or anything like that. It could be that you may have some user who accidentally clicked into some spreadsheet and modified some data somewhere that they weren't supposed to modify, and all of a sudden now all of your accounts for whatever your clients are doing, they're getting the wrong sales data now. They're getting the wrong pricing data now. And guess what? You just had a compromise, an incident in your network that, quite frankly, could have been prevented in the first place if you were actually practicing proper security hygiene. So, how do we establish this secure baseline? Well, first things first. Again, you have to know what you have. I'm not going to stop harping on this. You got to know what you have. Once you know what you have, then you can go out and look at these different configurations. There's actually some baseline controls out there that you can use. What's one of my? I lost it, Bill. What is the baseline configuration?
There's a CIS benchmarks that gives all different kinds of applications and the security configurations, level 1, 2, and 3 for you.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I was looking for, the benchmarks. And keep in mind that the benchmarks can go from very light to very hardcore. And if applied wrong, right, well, you can cause a system shutdown where you can't use it at all. So be very careful with that.
I would also add as a point of interest that they do have benchmarks for cloud-based solutions as well.
They do.
If you're AWS or Azure or whatever, there's benchmarks for that too.
Absolutely.
And typically for the benchmarks, the security settings that you're putting, if there are potential negative effects, they tend to list those so that you're at least aware that it could cause connectivity issues if things are not communicating right once you start switching something over.
And if you're here, I'm sure what you know the acronym RTFM means, but just in case, it means read the freaking manual, right? So if you start going and applying stuff just willy-nilly without actually understanding what you're doing, guilty. It causes problems. And again, guilty. So be careful about how you do stuff like that, right? If you don't know what you're doing, read about it first. If you have questions, reach out to one of us. We're more than happy to help. We love answering questions and helping people out, right? We only charge about $325, $350 an hour to do that. So ensure all of your operating systems and browsers and softwares are all kept up to date. This goes back to patching, right? Adopt strong password policies. Listen, 8-character passwords are a thing of the past, right? If you adopt a strong password policy, and I say password because that's still the word that we use, but let's be honest, we should be using passphrases. We should be using sentences and stuff like that. Passwords should no longer be a thing, right? 15-character passwords, fine. But let's be honest, people aren't going to be able to remember 15-character passwords, especially if they're randomly generated passwords or anything else. It's just, if they do, they're going to use the same password for everything so that they don't have to try to remember 17,000 different ones, right? So
I've got a 42-character password that I've got memorized.
Well, yeah, but that's a sentence, right?
No, it's not a sentence.
It's not a sentence. Is it a song lyric or a Bible verse or something?
Oh, no, it's gibberish.
It is absolute gibberish.
It is.
You're a maniac. I'm just going to say that. You are a maniac, sir. I don't know what's wrong with you. That's incredible. And my hat goes off to you if I had one. But that's nuts, all right? Most of my passwords consist around song lyrics and Bible verses, or do they? I've said too much. Use encryption to protect your sensitive systems, especially like laptops and any kind of mobile devices whatsoever. Make sure that you're securing those with encryption, and strong encryption at that, right? Windows has BitLocker built in. Mac OS has, not Time Machine. What's the disk stuff for Mac OS, Jason?
I can't remember.
It's been a while for me too. Anyway, the idea, of course, again, File Vault. Thank you. Yes, use File Vault for Mac OS. Encrypt all your stuff on any of your phones, right? It's very simple. And then you go to inform your personnel, right? You're providing basic cybersecurity awareness training. Tell them about phishing, right? Tell them, hey, listen, phishing attacks are going to happen. Figure out how to identify these phishing attacks, right? The thing is according to the DIR, going back to the Verizon data breach report, 74% of all breaches included the human element in 2023, right? And that included like errors, privilege misuse, use of stolen credentials, or social engineering, right? In 2024, that number went down to 68%. But I have a feeling that that's because they excluded privilege misuse. So the numbers may have actually gone up just a little bit, because of people just giving away their information through social engineering attacks or anything else, right? 83% in 2023 involved breaches of external actors. And a lot of the times, actually, I mean, most of the time, from what I'm reading here, about 95% of the breaches were financially motivated. In 2024, it's pretty much the same. The thing is a lot of these breaches come from stolen credentials, phishing, and exploiting, web application vulnerabilities and stuff. But if you're informing your users about what to look for whenever it comes to any kind of social engineering attacks, and we're talking phishing phone calls, phishing emails, phishing text messages, which is going to be phishing, email phishing, and of course smishing, which I hate those words, phishing and smishing, but they are what they are. You can avoid a lot of these attacks. Train your organization, train your personnel on how to recognize these, how to report them, and how to shut them down before they become a thing.
Yep. So jumping through, we're running up on the end of time here, so I'm going to hop through this last couple slides. Nope, no worries at all, man. There's a lot of things that you can do to help prepare your organization. Some of those things will include backups. And when you're doing backups, key thing to keep in mind, actually practice a recovery of the backup, because just taking the backup is typically not enough. You want to make sure that the process works and actually restoring that data and making sure that the data is there in its entirety and the integrity of that data is intact.
And I want to say this, having been through a scenario like that where we were attacked with a ransomware before I started security consulting, we actually had done a backup recovery process just like a month or two before that happened, and found out that our backups had been corrupted. You do not want to be in a situation where you have some kind of ransomware attack or other attack on your network and your organization, where you find out the hard way that your backups were corrupt and no longer are functional.
Yep. Other things we mentioned earlier, user awareness training. There's tabletop exercises where you can get together. You can play out various scenarios. There are things that you can do for that to help prepare in advance for what you need to do. Iron out the wrinkles now before it actually becomes a live situation. So what's your worst situation? What's your worst case scenario? Can you recover from it? Try to go from beginning to end. This slide really is going to just highlight that you're looking at a lot of your business continuity planning. You're looking at your disaster recovery planning. The IG1s cover a lot of the core controls that you're going to need to protect against those types of situations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hop over. We have some additional resources. Feel free to pause here. And Jason, I will go ahead and we will wrap this up.
We can wrap this up. So we're pretty much at the end of our time here. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Aaron. No worries, man. And we'll be seeing you next time. If you are interested in this slide deck and didn't get a chance to download it, I don't know if we actually even put it on handouts. Just shoot us an email. We'll send it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for all of the different links that we had in the last slide.
Yeah. So
just reach out to us, Aaron Moss at Aaron Moss at secureideas.org, or Bill at security. Why am I keep saying security? What is wrong with me today? Jason, you want to wrap this up, because I think my brain is done.
You can send an email to either one of those guys to get a copy of the deck, or just info@secureideas.com can get it too. So,
oh yeah.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. We really appreciate it.